we're going to create a custom plant to create leaves for the ground and use some of the other ecosystem options for layers. Now, I already have a plant picked out for this. If you go to load in a plant, right-clicking on the plant icon, go to grasses and plants, and I'm going to use the small grass field plant, which is going to give us the closest look we can get to leaves. It has 4 different leaf subsets, so we'll go ahead and load it in. And I don't really need to worry about even looking at it in the preview because of the way we're going to be editing it. So we'll just right-click, Edit Object, because it is selected. And we can see we have 4 leaf subsets, A, B, C, and D. And each one has a separate leaf material that we can modify the length, width, how random it is, randomness being scale variation, the flexibility and curl. Flexibility and curl work the same way, just in different directions on the polygon. And that's all kind of based on where the hooking point is. The hooking point's where the stem connects. So just by clicking on this little leaf icon, we can move around the hooking point wherever we want it and choose where the stem is going to connect to this leaf. If you're working with branches, then it's going to choose where the set of leaves or branch image is going to connect to the main geometry branches. And in this case, we really only have 1 stem subset. What I'm going to do is get rid of the length almost all the way on the stems and take the diameter and bring it down. What I can also do is edit the stem material and change the overall color to something a little more of a dark brown. Just in case it does show up. For the most part, we're going to be seeing the leaves. Now, we don't really need to worry about even going into the material editor at this point. I am going to be creating 3 different versions of this plant using a total of 12 major sets of images, 12 different leaves. So with the object selected and we go to the Links tab, we can see all of the leaves. What we have is a transparency map, a bump map, and then the color map. And I can increase the scale of the preview to see this a little bit better. We could also pull out the side. And once we replace these images, it will move it down the list. So I'm going to start from the bottom. And what we can do is right-click and choose Replace Link. Right now it's incorporated into the plant. But what we want to do is replace this image that's being used to create the plant and the different leaf surface. If we go through the materials up at the top, we have these little arrows where we can go through each of the individual materials. So if you did want to go into the material editor and swap them out this way by selecting the color, the bump, transparency, and using the arrow down in the lower left to load in a new image, you could do that as well. If you're using bump maps on leaves, pretty much anytime you use an image for a bump map, you do need to make sure the interpolation type is set to bilinear. What this does is smooths out the pixels so that you don't have pixelated looks on the displacement or the fake displacement. Color and transparency, it doesn't matter for, but bumps and highlight maps, anything that reacts directly with the lighting, you want to make sure that the bilinear mode is set, which will smooth that out. And you'll find that is common for all of the plants that come with Vue. But we don't even need to worry about going into the material editor, because all we need to do is replace these images with the ones I've already prepared. So we're going to start on the bottom using the color, right-click, replace the link. And these are some leaves I selected from the Leaves collection, version 2, from asileFX. And what I have are some different maple variations. Some are not all entirely maples. It's a palmate type leaf, at least the overall shape. And what I'm going to do is go through my list and just choose, as part of the set, I have a bump, a clip, and a color. So I'll select the color, and then I can replace the link with the bump, and then replace the link with clip or transparency map. It's technically not an alpha because an alpha would be inverted. Alpha is based on an opacity amount, which means white would be what shows. A clip or transparency map, white is what's cut out. You also have the ability to invert the image. You would need to do that within the material editor. First, I'm just going to load this in, and we're going to take a look. We can move over to the 5th material, which will now show this leaf. And I also want to note that pretty much all the leaves need to be upside down. All branch materials, anything like that, typically you need to use them upside down to get them to show up correctly within view. But we can now see that all the maps are replaced. If you want to invert, if you are using an alpha, the upper right corner of the texture will allow us to invert. And then you can also rotate around the image as well. So you would have to do that for all of them. I went ahead and ran a Photoshop action just to rotate all of them 180 degrees, so I don't have to do it for every single one within view. So I'm going to go through and assign all of these, that new set of leaves I've picked out. I've got a total of 12. There's only 4 I can replace per plant, so I am going to create 3 different plants total. And then after I replace these, we'll take a look at editing the object a little more, getting the materials to match up, and changing leaf sizes. So first I'll just go ahead and replace all of these. Okay, so we can see all of the new leaves that are applied, and I can go through all 4 of the leaf subset materials, and we can see all of them. We can also open up the material summary and see each of the leaves that are available. So now that's edit the object, where we can see, in this case, the previews, and the alpha has not updated. So what I need to do to make sure that that registers is go through each of the materials and edit them and give them new names. So actually, we'll just go ahead and add dead in front of all of the letters. Go ahead and copy the dead text, click OK. And I can just paste it in front of each of the materials' names, hopefully. Refreshing the alphas or the clip maps, go over, select that plant, edit the object, and in this case it does look like it's just not registering that it has been modified. So if that's happening, what you can do is, instead of using that replace link, you can go through, edit the objects, and replace each of the images that way, which of course takes a little bit longer, but in this case looks like it might be the only way we're going to be able to see the material showing up. I am going to try to modify the scale, grow a new plant, go back, and change it back. And it doesn't look like that's really registering, unfortunately. It also seems to be applying the same leaf to every single subset. So in this case, it probably isn't going to be the best way to edit the plant if we want an Opengl preview. It will render correctly, though. So if you're not worried about the Opengl preview, it's fine. If not, you will need to perform a different operation. And I do need to change that stem color because it did get set back to the original. Edit the object, and we can still see that we're having a few issues with that. So I'm going to try to reset and change the hooking points, see if that applies it. If not, what I'm going to do is set kind of a midway hooking point. I do want to be curling the leaves, and I'm not really worried about where they're connected on the stems, because I'm not using the stems. Having the hooking point set controls also where the flexibility and curl options apply to the object. So we could have some actually starting from the stem and some going more towards the center. So I do want this Opengl preview to be fixed. One of the purposes of having an Opengl preview is to see what we're working on without having to render. So what I'm going to do is just go through the materials and access each of the subset materials, double-clicking to open the material for that, and change out each of the image maps directly within the material editor. And hopefully that initiates the refresh on the materials so that the Opengl is showing up correctly. And then we can go ahead and take a look at adding that next ecosystem layer and looking at some more advanced options and some cool techniques you can use for ground cover and just ecosystems in general. Okay, what I ended up doing in order to get this to work correctly, since there was a little bit of an error, I ended up just creating a new scene in order to edit the plants. And then creating the species from there, I'm going to save them and open them up into the main scene. So saving the other scene first, starting a new scene, loading in the plant. And what I found that worked the best to get the Opengl to show correctly was before editing the plant, accessing the materials through the aspect tab and editing the functions and loading in the maps that way. I was able to keep the editor open and just go through the different subsets and edit the materials. And that correctly worked for the transparency, if that's something that is not fixed in the version you're using. It has been a problem in the previous couple of versions and has not yet been fixed. So I'll go ahead and report the issue and see if we can get it fixed by the final version. So let's go ahead and take a look at just editing some of these leaves. Now that we can see them in the Opengl, I'm going to edit the hooking point on the first leaf we have, and I also did forget to add in the dead naming, but that's alright. So what we can do is see the subset changing. We can adjust the flexibility, the curl amount, how random we want the leaves to be, so the overall scaling, also adjusting length and width. And the length and width setting will change depending on the position of the leaf itself and also the hooking point. You'll also find that some leaves have a hooking point in the corner, and when that happens, the flexibility and curl pretty much do the same thing, just working from the edges, and some of the plants do work that way. So you can kind of just pay attention to the way the setup is of the plant you're editing. So we can go through and make modifications. Adjusting flexibility and curl to add some nice variation overall to the different surfaces. Giving some different scales. And I'm just going to edit the last one, make it a little bit larger, a little more randomness, reduce the flexibility on this one. These ones are going to curl up a little bit more. Bring the curl down. Okay, so now when we have it edited the way we want, actually I'm going to get rid of the randomness. When we create a new plant, we'll be able to see the kind of variations that are going to show up. And when we want to save a new species, we go up to the top and select Save Plant Species. There's also the ability just to save the plant itself. Within this, we can also modify the response to wind. So we click on this option up here, and we can see we can adjust the trunk or branches and the sensitivity of the leaves. Remember, right now it's set to 1 for both. Now the trunk/branches will be the stem. So I'm going to select 0 for the stem. And the leaves and the sensitivity to the breeze, I'm going to really reduce this amount because these are going to be objects that are on the ground. Now a lot of these settings do depend on the scale of the object itself. It will change. If I was to make very small leaves, they'd be greatly impacted by the breeze setting. I'm going to reduce this down to 0.1 since they're going to be on the ground. So if we are rendering an animation, the fluttering will be very minimal. We could even set it to 0 if you don't want them to move at all. And then we can go ahead and save out the plant species and then load it into the other scene. Now, when you select to save a plant species, you do want to make sure that you are incorporating the texture maps. Always a good idea to do that when you're creating new species. You can also choose to use the current preview, which is going to render from within the plant editor. You can also keep an existing preview if you're editing an object that already has a preview, or you can render out your own preview and use a custom image, which that'll allow you to choose after you save. It's also a good idea, and what I like to do is in the description always include the plant that you've edited in order to get to the point you're at. That way if you ever need to make modifications, or if you're purchasing cornucopia content, anything like that where you would have a problem loading in the species or need to come back to it. This way you know the plant you used to edit it, because normally by the time you're done, there's really not a good way to tell which species are which. You can normally figure it out by looking at the subset amounts, and there is a list on asileFX.com under the free section that does show the subsets of every single plant, how many stem subsets or branch, how many leaf or petal type subsets there are, and that is a good reference for kind of deciphering that. It also has different scales and solid growth scales to kind of give you a better idea how to position things and scale them before you create an ecosystem. So I'm going to finish saving this up, and then we can load it into the other scene.